The doors of the grand Scylla wedding hall had been open for exactly 40 minutes when everything stopped. Zara Mensa stood at the altar in ivory silk, orchids trembling in her hands, heart hammering behind the smile she'd practiced for weeks. The guests were seated, the string quartet was playing something soft and European, and Daniel Cho stood beside her looking handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his hand warm around hers. Everything was perfect. Everything was finally, mercifully perfect. Until the double doors at the back of the hall opened with a sound like a verdict, and 200 heads turned at once. Kang Min-ho walked in alone. No entourage, no announcement. Just him in a black dress shirt with the top 2 buttons open, full-sleeve tattoo visible where his cuffs were rolled to the elbow, dragon ink curling up his neck, swept back dark hair, and eyes so still and so dark they looked like the surface of deep water before a body sank. He didn't rush. He didn't look at the guests. He walked down the center aisle the way men walked into rooms they already owned. Unhurried, inevitable, scanning the altar until his gaze found Zara and simply stopped. The string quartet fell silent one instrument at a time. "Get away from her," Minho said quietly. He wasn't looking at the guests. He wasn't performing for the room. He was looking at Daniel Cho with the specific, absolute calm of a man who had already decided what was going to happen next and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Daniel's hand tightened around Zara. A groomsman reached for his phone. 3 people in the back row stood up. But nobody moved forward, because everyone in Seoul, and enough people in this room knew exactly who Kang Min-ho was, understood that when this particular man whispered, the next sound you heard was usually something breaking. Zara's bouquet hit the floor. "Welcome to Echoes of Seoul and Africa TV, besties. Please endeavor to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. It won't take more than 30 seconds to do so." 6 months earlier, Zara Mensa had been nobody's problem and proud of it. She arrived in Seoul on a research grant from the University of Accra, attached to the Urban Sociology Department at Yonsei University, studying the intersection of organized crime and real estate development in Seoul's expanding districts. She was 28, curvy, dark-skinned, wickedly intelligent, and completely uninterested in the city's social hierarchy. She had her research, her tiny apartment in Mapogu, her rotating collection of oversized cardigans, and a deadline that was going to destroy her if she didn't find a primary source willing to talk on record about how certain properties in Gangnam were being acquired through shell companies fronted by organizations the Korean government officially pretended didn't exist. She had a name, Kang Min-ho, chairman of KM Holdings, philanthropist, occasional government consultant, and according to every whispered conversation she'd had with academics, journalists, and one very frightened city planner over the past 3 months, the man who actually ran the Kang Syndicate, Seoul's oldest and most deeply embedded criminal organization. She had absolutely no intention of meeting him. Then her contact got arrested, her primary documents were seized, and her faculty advisor back in Accra sent an email that was very politely worded but essentially said, "Find something or come home." So Zara did what desperate researchers did. She went to a gala. The Kang Foundation's annual charity auction was held at the Lot Hotel in November. Black tie, 20,001 entrance tickets that her university's petty cash fund barely covered. Zara wore the one dress she'd brought to Seoul for emergencies, deep green silk that hugged her figure, natural 4C hair pinned up with a single gold clip, the kind of look that said she belonged there even if her bank account violently disagreed. She was there to observe, to take notes. Maybe corner a junior associate who'd had too much champagne and was willing to confirm what she already suspected about the Gangnam acquisitions. She was not there to drop her notebook directly onto the shoes of Kang Min-ho. It happened at the edge of the champagne table. She'd been scribbling while walking, a habit her mother had tried and failed to break her of, and she turned around and walked directly into a wall that turned out to be a man. The notebook fell. Her champagne tilted. He caught the glass before it tipped, one hand moving with reflexive speed that registered in her brain a half-second after it happened, and then she looked up. He was taller than she'd expected from photographs. The photographs hadn't captured the way he took up space, the specific gravity of him, like the air around him had different density. Dark eyes, sharp jaw, the faintest scar along his collarbone visible above his dress shirt collar. The sleeve tattoo hidden under his tuxedo jacket, but she could see the edge of ink at his wrist. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not annoyed, not amused, not anything she could categorize, just intensely, quietly focused. "Your notebook," he said in English, not a question. "Yes," she took it from the hand he extended. "Thank you, sorry, I wasn't looking." "I noticed." He picked up her pen from the floor without breaking eye contact. "What are you writing?" "Notes." "About?" "Urban sociology." She took the pen. "Property development in southeastern Seoul." Something shifted in his expression. Barely anything, just a slight adjustment around the eyes, but she caught it the way she caught everything. "That's a specific topic for a charity gala." "I'm a specific kind of person." He looked at her for 3 full seconds. Then the corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite not one, and he said, "Kang Min-ho," and extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and deliberate. "Zara Mensah." "You're African." "Ghanaian. University of Accra, visiting researcher at Yonsei." "What do you want, Ms. Mensah?" The directness of it should have startled her. Instead, it clarified something. "An interview," she said. "On the record, about property acquisition patterns in the Gangnam and Siacho districts over the last 7 years. He held her gaze for another long moment. "No." "I expected that." "Then why ask?" "Because the answer tells me something, and so does the way you say it." She held his stare. "You said it like you've had this conversation before." He looked at her the way people looked at things they weren't sure were safe to touch. "Enjoy the gala, Ms. Mensah." He walked away. She wrote 3 pages of notes in the next 20 minutes, none of them about property development. The next morning, she had a voicemail. Unknown number. The message was 12 words. "KM Holdings, 9 a.m., ask for Ms. Yoon, come alone." She played it 4 times. The voice was not Min Ho's, too clipped, too corporate, but the message was clearly from him. She went, because she was a researcher and researchers did not turn down primary sources, even when every alarm in her body was making a sound like emergency services. KM Holdings occupied the top 6 floors of a glass tower in Yeongdeungpo. Ms. Yoon was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who led Zara to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Han River that made her breath catch despite herself. She was left there with coffee she hadn't asked for, made exactly the way she took it, black, 1 sugar, which she noticed immediately, and filed in the part of her brain that catalogued things that should not be possible. Min-ho arrived 7 minutes later, suit jacket on this time, every button closed, the full professional armor. He sat across from her, folded his hands on the table and said, "You can ask 3 questions. On background, not on record. What I confirm or deny is at my discretion." "That's not an interview." "No, it's an audition." Zara set down her coffee. "Audition for what?" "To see if you're worth talking to." She held his gaze. "May I start?" He inclined his head. She asked her 3 questions. She'd been awake until 2 a.m. selecting them, discarding the obvious ones, choosing instead the questions that would reveal how much he already knew she knew, that would show her hand just enough to demonstrate she was serious, while watching his face for the tells that would tell her more than any answer. He answered one directly, deflected one with a precision that was itself informative, and on the third, he simply looked at her for a long moment and said, "Where did you get that?" "Not a question, an assessment." "I'm a researcher," she said. "You're dangerous," he said, and the way he said it, quiet, almost reflective, like he was nodding something for himself rather than telling her, made the hair on her arms stand up. She left the building 40 minutes later with her heart rate elevated, and 3 quotes she could use, and the absolute certainty that Kang Min-ho had just decided she was interesting, which was simultaneously the best and worst thing that could have happened to her research. The calls started a week later. Not from him directly. From Ms. Yoon, who would contact her with information, documents, public filings, occasionally a name, That was borderline but technically accessible if you knew exactly where to look, which Zara hadn't known until it appeared in her inbox. She told herself it was a source developing, told herself this was how investigative research worked when you were embedded in a world that operated on proximity and trust. She did not tell herself why she'd started paying more attention to her appearance on the mornings Ms. Yoon mentioned Minho might be in the building. The third time Zara went to KM Holdings, he was waiting in the lobby. Not in a conference room, not in his office. The lobby, standing by the windows with coffee in both hands, looking out at the street with the particular stillness of a man who could afford to wait for things because things came to him eventually. He turned when she came through the doors and handed her one of the cups. "You remembered," she said, faintly unsettled. "Black, 1 sugar." He started toward the elevator like this had been planned, and she followed because she was apparently the kind of person who followed Kang Minho now. "I have something to show you." What he showed her was a floor of KM Holdings she hadn't seen before, not corporate, not polished, more like a working archive. Maps, zoning documents, decades of property records, things that were technically public but would have taken her 6 more months to compile. He stood beside her while she went through them, not hovering, just present, answering her questions when she asked them, occasionally pointing out something she'd missed with the quiet precision of someone who'd spent years knowing exactly which threads to pull. "Why are you helping me?" she asked at one point, not looking up from the documents. "I'm not helping you. I'm managing you." She looked up. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't entirely serious. "There's a difference," she asked. "If I help you, you publish something damaging and disappear back to Accra. If I manage you, I control what you find and when, and you stay in Seoul long enough to finish your research properly." He held her gaze. "Which do you prefer?" She should have said the first one. The independent, academically rigorous first one. "The second," she said instead, and watched something in his expression settle, like a question had been answered he hadn't known he was asking. A few weeks later, she realized she was in trouble. Not research trouble, personal trouble. The kind that started small, noticing how his voice changed when he spoke Korean on the phone versus English to her, like 2 different registers of the same instrument. The way he remembered everything she mentioned in passing, that she missed her mother's groundnut soup, that she couldn't sleep when it rained because it sounded different in Seoul than in Accra. The way he'd once, just once, put his hand on the small of her back when guiding her through a crowded building corridor, and then removed it so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it, except that she hadn't, and she'd thought about it for 3 days. She was developing feelings for a man who ran a criminal empire, and had told her to her face that their entire relationship was a management strategy. She made a rule, professional distance only. She was a researcher, he was a subject. She would finish her work and go home. The rule lasted exactly 9 days. On day 10, she was at her apartment late at night going through documents when someone knocked on her door. She checked the peephole and went still. Minho stood in her hallway in a dark coat, hair slightly damp from rain, looking like he hadn't slept. She opened the door. "How do you know where I live?" "I know everything," he said, which should have been alarming and was instead, somehow, comforting in a way that disturbed her. "Someone followed you this afternoon." She blinked. "What?" "From the university. A man. He's connected to a council member whose name appears in your documents." His jaw was tight. "He was photographing you." The cold that moved through her was not the November air. "What does that mean?" "It means you've gotten close enough to make someone nervous." He stepped inside without being invited, moved to her window, and looked down at the street. "It means you need to be more careful." "Minho." "I'm not asking you to stop your research." He turned from the window. "I'm telling you that certain people know who you are now, and they will try to pressure you, discredit you, or worse, to make you go away. I need you to." He stopped. "You need me to what?" His jaw worked. "I need you to let me handle it." "That's not something I can agree to without knowing what handle it means in your vocabulary." Something in his expression shifted, the armor cracked, just slightly, just around the edges. "It means no one touches you. That's what it means. Everything else is details. The silence between them had weight. Are you protecting me because it's useful? Zara asked quietly. Or because you want to? Minho looked at her for a long time. Then he crossed the room to where she stood by the kitchen counter, stopping close enough that she could see the ink at his collar, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. He lifted one hand and tucked a loose coil of her natural hair behind her ear with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything else he was, and he said, very quietly, "Don't ask me questions I'm not ready to answer yet." Her breath caught. He stepped back. "Lock your door after I leave. Don't take routes to the university you've taken more than twice in a row. Call Ms. Yoon if anything feels wrong." He left. She stood in her kitchen for 10 minutes before she remembered to breathe properly. The following week, the council member's office sent a letter to Yonsei University formally questioning Zara's research methodology and suggesting her visa status be reviewed. It was bureaucratic, it was petty, and it was exactly the kind of pressure that got foreign researchers quietly deported without anyone making too much noise about it. Zara read the letter twice and then called Ms. Yoon. Ms. Yoon sounded unsurprised. "Mr. Kang is aware. He's handling it." "What does handling it?" "The council member will be otherwise occupied by Thursday," Ms. Yoon said. "Your visa review has been indefinitely postponed. The department head at Yonsei received a very generous grant from an anonymous foundation this morning." A pause. "Mr. Kang would like to have dinner with you tonight if you're available." Zara's heart did something inconvenient. Tell him I'm available. Dinner was at a restaurant she'd never have found herself, hidden behind an unmarked door in Insadong, 6 tables, no menu, the kind of place that existed only if you knew it existed. Minho was already there when she arrived, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, ink visible, looking more like himself than she'd seen him anywhere else. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and something about the gesture, old-fashioned and deliberate, made her chest ache in a way she was trying to stop noticing. They talked for 3 hours. About her research, yes, but also about other things. Her childhood in Accra, the market near her family's house, her mother who called every Sunday and asked when Zara was going to stop studying criminals and start becoming someone respectable. He listened the way he did everything, with complete, total attention, like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. He told her things too, not about his work, but about himself, small things, the kind of things people traded when they were deciding whether to trust someone. His mother had died when he was 19. He didn't sleep well. He'd been to Ghana twice on business and thought Accra was one of the most alive cities he'd ever seen. "You've been to Accra," she said, startled. "I've been many places." He refilled her wine glass. "I spent a week there 8 years ago. I remember thinking the light was different there, like the air held it differently." "My mother says the light in Accra has memory," Zara said, surprising herself. "That it remembers everyone who was ever born there." Minho was quiet for a moment. "That's beautiful." "She's a poet." "Where do you think you get it?" "Get what?" He looked at her steadily. "The way you see things." The candlelight between them felt suddenly very close. "Minho." "I know," he said quietly. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were doing something she didn't have words for yet. "I know." She walked home alone that night because she needed the cold air, needed the distance, needed to remind herself of all the reasons this was impossible. His world, her work, the fundamental incompatibility of everything they represented. She made lists in her head. She was very good at lists. The lists didn't help. The complication arrived in the form of Daniel Cho. He was introduced to her at a faculty dinner, Korean-American, assistant professor of international business at Yonsei, handsome in the specific way of someone who knew it, charming in the way that came from practice rather than nature. He asked for her number at the end of the evening with the confidence of someone who expected to receive it. She gave it to him because he was appropriate. He was safe. He was the kind of person who belonged in her actual life. They went to dinner once, then twice. He was good company, smart, curious, attentive. He made her laugh. He brought her flowers, actual flowers, not whatever it was that Minho did, which was simultaneously more impactful and completely unclassifiable. She mentioned Daniel to Ms. Yoon by accident, a casual reference to rescheduling something because she had dinner plans. Ms. Yoon's response was efficient and gave nothing away. But the next time Zara came to KM Holdings, Minho's entire energy had changed. It was subtle, the way everything with him was subtle. He was perfectly civil. He answered her questions with the same precision as always. But there was a tension in his jaw she hadn't seen before, and he'd stood closer to her than usual when they were looking at documents, not inappropriately close, but deliberately close, like he was marking territory without quite saying so. When she referenced needing to leave early for a personal commitment, his eyes moved to her face with a specificity that felt like a question he'd decided not to ask. 2 days later, she was having coffee with Daniel near campus when a black car pulled up and Minho got out on the opposite side of the street to enter a building. He didn't look at her. He couldn't have seen her from that distance, through the cafe window, from across the street. Except he had, because she could tell from the line of his shoulders as he walked through the door that he was aware of exactly what he was seeing, and it cost him something to keep walking. She excused herself from Daniel 10 minutes early. That evening, her phone rang. Unknown number, Minho's private line. "Are you safe?" he asked when she picked up. "Yes." A pause. Who was the man at the cafe? She could have denied knowing what he was talking about. She didn't. A colleague from the faculty. Silence, then. Is he important to you? Minho. Answer the question, Zara. She pressed her fingers to the bridge of her nose. He's someone I've had dinner with, that's all. Another silence, longer this time. When Minho spoke again, his voice was quieter. Controlled in a way that suggested the control was costing him. I don't have the right to ask you not to see him. No, she agreed softly. You don't. But I want to. The admission hung between them like smoke in still air. Why? She asked. Because every time you're near me, I spend the entire time trying to remember all the reasons I shouldn't say the things I want to say to you. His voice had dropped to something rough-edged and unguarded. And every time you leave, I count the hours until I have a reason to see you again. And the idea of someone else, he stopped. I don't have the right. I know I don't have the right. Minho. Go to sleep, Zara. His voice shifted back, smoothed out. I'll have the Siacho documents ready for you Thursday. He hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. Thursday came. She went to KM Holdings. Minho was in a meeting and she was shown to the archive floor by one of his staff. She was deep in a file when footsteps came behind her, and she turned expecting Minho. Instead, a man she didn't know stood in the doorway, older, heavy-set, the particular expensive ease of someone who'd had money long enough that it stopped impressing even him. Ms. Mensah, he smiled without warmth. I've been hopping to meet you. She kept her voice even. I don't believe we've been introduced. We haven't. I'm Oh Si-jin, an associate of Minho's. He stepped into the room. I've heard a great deal about your research. Impressive work for someone so young. Thank you. I'd love to see what you've compiled. He was still smiling. Particularly your findings on the Gangnam acquisitions. I have a personal interest in that area. Zara set down the document in her hand. That's not something I'd share outside of publication. Of course not. I only meant as a professional courtesy. She said no. Minho's voice came from the doorway. He was still in his suit jacket, expression perfectly composed, but there was something absolutely still about him in the way that water went still before it flooded. Oh Si-jin turned, and the ease in his manner adjusted almost imperceptibly. A recalibration, the way men recalibrated in the presence of someone more dangerous than themselves. Minho, I know what you were just. Minho's voice was pleasantly even. Ms. Mensah's research is her own. I'd encourage you not to ask again. The look that passed between them had history and weight Zara couldn't fully read, but its conclusion was clear. Oh Si-jin inclined his head, made pleasantries that no longer reached his eyes, and left. When his footsteps disappeared down the hallway, Minho turned to her. "Are you all right?" "He asked to see my research. I said no." She studied him. "Who is he, really?" "Someone who wants to know what you know before it becomes public." His jaw was tight. "He won't ask again." "Minho," she stepped closer. "How many people are worried about what I'm going to publish?" He met her eyes. "Enough." "Should I be scared?" "No," the word was absolute. "I won't let anything happen to you." She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him completely and without reservation, which was either a testament to how well she knew him or evidence that she'd lost some critical professional objectivity approximately 2 months ago. "You keep saying that," she said quietly. "Because I keep meaning it." He reached out, just barely, and brushed his fingers against the back of her hand. A touch so brief it could have been accidental, except that his eyes didn't look like it was accidental. "Come, I'll walk you out." She went with him, and their hands didn't quite touch in the elevator, and she was fairly certain they were both pretending not to notice. The night everything broke open started with a phone call from Daniel. He'd gotten tickets to something, a concert, a gallery opening. She barely registered the specifics because while he was talking, she was looking at her open laptop and the email that had just come in from her department head, in across saying that a formal complaint about her research ethics had been filed by an unnamed Korean official, and she needed to respond within 48 hours or face having her grant suspended. She handled it calmly, professionally, sending 3 emails and 2 carefully worded messages to her contacts. But when she put her phone down 2 hours later, she realized her hands were shaking. And then her door knocked. She opened it not expecting anyone, and Minho stood there looking like he'd come directly from somewhere serious, tie loosened, collar open, hair slightly out of its usual order. He looked at her face and something crossed his expression. "What happened?" "How do you always know?" she asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "What happened?" he said again, and this time it was softer, and she didn't mean to tell him everything, but she did. The complaint, the grant, the 48 hours, the months of work potentially unraveling over someone's bureaucratic revenge. He listened without interrupting, leaning against her kitchen counter with his arms folded, watching her face while she talked. When she finished, the silence lasted exactly long enough to feel considered. "The complaint will be withdrawn by morning," he said. "Minho, you can't just—" "It will be withdrawn," he said, quieter. "And the official who filed it will find that several of his own activities receive the kind of scrutiny he hoped to redirect onto you." He pushed off the counter and crossed to her, and something in his expression was entirely unguarded in a way she'd only seen in pieces before. "You're not going to lose this research, Zara. I won't let that happen." "Why not?" she whispered. He stopped in front of her close and raised one hand to her face, not hesitant this time, not a brush that could be accidental. He cupped her cheek, his thumb tracing along her jaw, his dark eyes on hers, and he said, "Because it matters to you, and you matter to me, and I'm done pretending I can be neutral about either of those things." Her breath left her completely. "I know what I am," he said, voice rough. "I know my world is violent and political and full of things that have no business near someone like you. I know I'm not what anyone would call a safe choice. But I have not been able to think clearly since the night you dropped your notebook on my shoes and looked up at me like you were cataloging my weaknesses." "I was," she admitted, barely above a whisper. "I know." Something that was definitely a smile this time, brief and devastating. "Find any?" "Too many." She reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "Minho." "Tell me to leave," he said. "Tell me this is inappropriate and professionally compromising, and you've been seeing someone else and I should." She kissed him. It happened without decision, like gravity completing itself. And for a half-second, he went entirely still, like he'd imagined this enough times that the reality of it short-circuited him briefly. And then he kissed her back with the careful, devastating thoroughness of a man who intended to do this exactly right. His other hand came up to cradle her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones, and she felt the slight tremor in them, the control he was holding onto by the thinnest margin. When they finally broke apart, his forehead dropped to hers. "Zara," he said, and just her name, just that in that voice, made her close her eyes. I know, she whispered. I'm going to make a mess of this. Probably, she pulled back enough to look at him. So will I. Something in his expression settled, like a storm resolving itself. He kissed her again, slower this time, unhurried, the kind of kiss that was a beginning rather than an event, and the city glittered outside her windows, and Seoul went on being loud and bright and indifferent, and neither of them noticed. Content fades. She woke to an empty pillow and a city already loud with mourning. The other side of the bed was still warm. A glass of water sat on her nightstand that hadn't been there before. On top of her closed laptop was a note in Minho's sharp, precise handwriting. Meetings until noon. The complaint has been handled. Come to KM Holdings at 2 M. No sentiment, no explanation. The glass of water said everything the note didn't. Zara lay in her bed for a long time and thought about how thoroughly and completely she was in trouble. The 2 o'clock meeting at KM Holdings was professionally ordinary, which felt almost offensive given what had happened the night before. Ms. Yoon was present. 2 of Minho's legal team were present. Zara sat across from Minho at the conference table, and he was completely, utterly composed, suit jacket on, every button closed, eyes moving between documents and her face with the same steady attention he gave everything, giving nothing away. Except that once, when she reached across the table for a document and her sleeve rode up, his eyes went to her wrist and stayed there for exactly 1 second longer than professional interest required. She caught him. He knew she caught him. Neither of them said anything. After the meeting, when the legal team had filed out and Ms. Yoon had diplomatically discovered something urgent requiring her attention elsewhere, Minho remained at the table and Zara remained in her chair, and the room held the particular pressure of 2 people not quite looking at each other. The complaint was fully withdrawn this morning, he said. The official involved has decided to pursue quieter priorities. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I know I don't. I'm doing it anyway. She looked at him directly. Minho, are we going to pretend last night didn't happen? He was quiet for a moment. I'm trying to determine whether pretending would be better for you. It wouldn't. She held his gaze. I've been pretending for months and it's been exhausting. Something broke through his composure, brief and real. So have I. She exhaled. So what now? He stood, moving around the conference table with that particular unhurried deliberateness, and stopped beside her chair, looking down at her with an expression that was completely unguarded for perhaps the first time she'd seen it in full daylight. He reached down and took her hand, turning it over, his thumb pressing lightly against her palm. Now, he said quietly, I would like to take you to dinner. Not a working dinner, not a meeting. Dinner. As what? As the woman I'm in love with, he said, without drama, without any particular ceremony, just the flat, honest weight of something he'd apparently been carrying for a while and had decided to set down. Zara's chest did something complicated. You're very calm about that. I'm not calm at all. His thumb traced a slow circle on her palm. I've been extraordinary at appearing calm. There's a difference. She stood, which put her very close to him, close enough to see the slight tension in his jaw, the controlled steadiness of his breathing. Minho. Yes. Take me to dinner. They were, for approximately 3 weeks, quietly and intensely happy. She moved between her apartment and his penthouse with an informality that didn't need to be discussed. He learned her schedule and arranged his around it without making a production of it. She learned that he woke early, that he drank coffee standing up by the window looking at Seoul like he was taking inventory of it, that he was unexpectedly funny in dry, understated ways that caught her off guard, that he touched her with a careful reverence that still somehow managed to make rational thought unreliable. She told her mother. Her mother said, "Is he kind to you?" And when Zara said yes, her mother said, "Then the rest is details, baby," in a tone that suggested she'd already decided she approved. Zara did not tell her mother the details of what specifically Minho did for a living beyond businessman. She also did not tell Daniel Cho that things had changed, because she hadn't actually needed to. She'd canceled their last 2 tentative plans without rescheduling, And Daniel, reading the situation with the intelligence she'd always credited him, had sent a message that said simply, "Good luck with everything," and that was the end of it. Or so she thought. The complication with Daniel arrived 3 weeks later in the form of Daniel himself. At a faculty event, Zara hadn't realized Daniel would also attend. He was pleasant and gracious and asked after her research with genuine interest. They talked for 20 minutes, during which he told her he was leaving Seoul at the end of the semester, a position in Singapore, a fresh start. He seemed happy about it. She was happy for him, genuinely, warmly, without complication. What she was not prepared for was Minho arriving at the faculty event. She hadn't known he was coming. He'd been asked by the university dean to speak briefly about the Kang Foundation's research grants, and crossing the room toward her while she was mid-conversation with Daniel. And the expression on his face when he saw them together being something she felt across the room before she could see it clearly. He arrived at her side, and his hand went to the small of her back, a proprietary, particular gesture she recognized, and his voice was perfectly civilized when he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt." Daniel looked between them with the rapid comprehension of an intelligent person processing new information. "Not at all." He extended his hand. "Daniel Cho." Kang Minho. His grip was controlled, his eyes were not. The conversation that followed was brief and cordial and completely excruciating in subtext. When Daniel excused himself with good grace, Minho's hand remained exactly where it was, and the tension in his jaw was visible to anyone looking, which Zara was. "You didn't tell me he would be here," Minho said low. "I didn't know he would be." She kept her voice quiet. "Minho, nothing happened. We talked for 20 minutes about his new job in Singapore." "He was looking at you." "People look at me. I'm standing in a room." His jaw tightened further. "Not the way he was looking at you." She turned slightly to face him, putting herself between him and the rest of the room. "Are you jealous?" "I'm observant." "You're jealous." A pause, something that was almost sheepish crossed his face, which was so unlike him that she nearly laughed. "I don't share well," he said finally, with the tone of a man admitting a character flaw he'd long since stopped trying to correct. "Good thing I'm not asking you to," she said softly. She reached up and straightened his lapel, a small, deliberate gesture of possession that his eyes tracked with complete attention. "He's leaving Seoul. We spoke for 20 minutes about nothing. You are the only person I want to talk to for 20 minutes about nothing." His hand pressed slightly firmer against her back. "I don't like him." "You don't have to." She held his gaze. "But you do have to behave for the rest of this event, because the university dean is watching us, and I need my grant renewed." He breathed out through his nose. "Fine." "Thank you." He behaved. He was, in fact, impeccably charming for the remainder of the event, which was somehow more unsettling than the jealousy, because it demonstrated with absolute clarity what a controlled performance his public manner was, and what it meant that he let her see the uncontrolled version. The danger arrived without warning, as it always did in his world. Zara was at the university library, working late, when her phone lit up with a message from a number she didn't recognize. "Your research has attracted the wrong kind of attention. Meet me tonight. I have documents you need. Come alone." She photographed the message and sent it to Minho immediately. His response came in 45 seconds. "Do not go. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone." She stayed. A car arrived 20 minutes later with 2 of Minho's security staff, who drove her to the penthouse in silence. Minho was there when she arrived, jacket off on the phone, the particular cold precision in his movements that meant something serious was being managed. He held up one finger when she came in 1 minute and finished the call in Korean, then turned to her. "The message came from Oh Si-jin's people," he said. "The man from the archive. It was a setup to get you somewhere isolated." Zara's stomach dropped. "For what?" "To copy your research materials, or to use you to pressure me." His voice was flat in the way it went flat when he was furious and disciplining the fury. "I've dealt with Si-jin." "What does that mean?" "It means he's no longer a concern." He crossed to her, scanned her face, her hands. You're not hurt. I never went anywhere. Good. His hand came up to her face, tilting it up slightly. You sent me the message immediately. Of course I did. Something in him released. You didn't try to handle it yourself. I trust you, she said simply. The way he looked at her when she said that was overwhelming enough that she had to look away briefly. He pulled her against him, his arms coming around her with the controlled urgency of someone who'd spent the last 45 minutes managing fear, and she felt the tension in him, the slight unevenness of his breathing. The way his hands pressed against her back, like he was verifying she was solid and real. I need you to be more careful, he said into her hair. I was careful, I called you. I need you to always call me. I will, she pressed her face against his shoulder. Minho, I'm okay. I know, his arms tightened. I know. The following weeks were calmer, but the threat had shifted something in Minho. He was more attentive, more present, his security arrangements around her more visible. She didn't mind, in truth. She'd grown up in a world where protection was communicated through action rather than words, and she understood the language of it. What unsettled her wasn't the security. It was the occasional expression she caught on his face when he thought she wasn't looking. Something weighted. Something that carried the particular heaviness of a man sitting with a decision he hadn't made yet. She asked him about it one evening, directly, because she'd learned that indirection with him was a waste of both their time. What are you thinking about? They were on his balcony. Soul was doing what Soul did best, making the darkness look expensive. He was quiet for a moment. My world, he said, and yours, and what it costs you to be in mine. I chose to be in it. You chose me, he said, carefully distinct. My world came with me, those aren't the same thing. She turned to look at him. Are you about to tell me something is wrong? I'm about to tell you something is right. He set down his glass, turned to face her fully. I've been in the process of restructuring my organization for the last 2 years, transferring certain operations, dissolving others, establishing legitimate governance structures that don't require my personal involvement in the elements that, he paused, the elements that would make your research about me complicated to publish. Zara stared at him. You're restructuring your criminal organization. I'm restructuring my business interests, he said, with a precision that might have been humor. So that when your research publishes, it's historically accurate without being currently actionable. And so that the life you'd be building with me has the least possible amount of, he stopped. Minho, she stepped toward him, were you going to say with me? He held her gaze. I've been thinking, he said carefully, about what it would look like to ask you to stay in Seoul, not for a semester, not for a grant period, indefinitely. Her heart was doing something that made thinking difficult. What would that look like? It would look like me asking you to marry me, he said, with the same flat honesty he applied to everything, which I'm aware is. Yes, she said. He stopped. I haven't finished. You didn't need to. She was close to him now, close enough to see the slight shock in his expression, the way his breath had changed. Yes, Minho, to whatever you were about to say, yes. He looked at her for a long moment in which Seoul was very loud and very far away. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced a ring, not an overwrought gesture, not an elaborate setup, just a ring, simple and extraordinary, a dark center stone that caught the light like the bottom of deep water. I was going to be more prepared than this, he said. I don't want prepared, she held out her hand. I want you. He slid the ring onto her finger with hands that weren't quite steady. When he looked up at her, she saw on his face the expression she'd catalogued months ago in a gala champagne line and filed under things I cannot name yet, and now she had the name for it. She had it for a while. He kissed her, and the city glittered, and neither of them was thinking about research methodology or criminal enterprises or anything at all, except the particular warmth of choosing someone completely. The engagement lasted 4 months, which was how long it took for the problem to arrive that Zara hadn't seen coming. She published a preliminary paper, controlled, strategic, covering the property acquisition patterns without implicating anyone specifically by name. It was well received academically. It was less well received by certain individuals whose business practices it adjacent referenced. And somehow, in the way that social information moved in Seoul's particular social ecosystem, word reached Daniel Cho in Singapore that Zara Mensah was engaged to Kang Min-ho. Daniel called her. She answered because they were on good terms, because it was fine, because there was nothing complicated about it. Except that Daniel, in Singapore, had apparently spent some months discussing his experience in Seoul with colleagues in his new department, one of whom had connections to a Korean journalist who was working on a story about the Kang organization. And somehow, in the tangled web of professional social networks, Zara's name had become attached to the journalist's research in a way that was not entirely accurate. The story that ran suggested that Zara Mensah, Ghanaian researcher, had embedded herself into the Kang organization not for academic purposes, but as an informant for an unnamed international body, and that her engagement to Kang Min-ho was either cover for an ongoing investigation or evidence that she'd been turned. It was, in every particular, a lie. It ran on a Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, Zara's phone had received 47 messages from numbers she didn't know. Her university email had been forwarded a screenshot of the article 9 times, and Min-ho had gone very, very quiet. Not cold. She braced herself for cold. Instead, he was quiet in a way that was somehow more frightening, still, contained, sitting at his desk in the penthouse looking at his phone with the expression of a man calculating. "Talk to me," she said. "I'm thinking." "Talk to me while you think." He looked up. "I know you had nothing to do with this." The steadiness of it, no question, no accusation, released something in her chest she hadn't realized was held. "Yes. I know where it came from." His voice was even. "I know who the journalist's sources were. I know what was fabricated and what was distorted, and I know how to correct it." He paused. "What I'm thinking about is whether you want to stay in Seoul for what happens next, because it's going to be public and it's going to be unpleasant, and you have the option of returning to Accra until." "I'm not leaving." He looked at her steadily. "Zara." "I'm not leaving," she said again, firmer. "I didn't run when Oh Si-jin tried to copy my research. I didn't run when there were threats. I'm not running from a lie printed in a newspaper." She crossed to where he sat and stood in front of him. "I'm going to stay here and we're going to correct this together. And if your quiet, careful plan involves me being somewhere else while you handle it, recalculate." His jaw worked. "You're stubborn." "You knew that." "I did." Something in his expression shifted, the weight lifting slightly, something warm beneath it. He reached up and pulled her down into the chair beside him, keeping her hand. "Together, then." Together. What followed was Min-ho doing what Min-ho did, with the systematic, unhurried precision of a man who'd been navigating complicated situations since before Zara had her undergraduate degree. The journalist's sources were identified, their motivations made public in ways that undermined the story's credibility without touching the journalist directly. Min-ho was surgical about it, careful in ways that spoke of long practice at dismantling attacks without creating new ones. Zara gave an interview to a competing publication, not about Min-ho, about her research, her methodology, her academic record. She was careful, she was measured, she was exactly what she was. A serious researcher who had met a man and fallen in love with him and happened to be very good at her job. The interview ran Tuesday. The original story lost credibility by Wednesday. And on Thursday, Zara was walking to the university when Daniel Cho called. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I didn't know it would go that direction. I spoke to someone I trusted and I was wrong about the trust. I'm sorry, Zara." She stopped walking. "Did you know what they were going to do with what you said?" "No, I swear, but I should have been more careful." A pause. "Is he treating you well, Min-ho?" "Better than anyone ever has," she said honestly. A short silence. "Good, then I'm glad for you, even if he stopped. "I'm glad for you." She told Min-ho about the call that evening. He listened without his jaw tightening, which she took as growth. "He apologized," Min-ho said. "Genuinely." A pause. "Then I won't arrange for his Singapore experience to be inconvenient." She looked at him. That's very restrained. You wanted me to behave. I did, she kissed him on the cheek. I'm proud of you. The look he gave her in response to that was so unguarded and quietly pleased that she had to look away to prevent laughing. The wedding was set for April. Not a large wedding. Neither of them wanted large. 100 guests at most, held at a private estate outside the city where the gardens were extraordinary, and the city noise was distant enough to forget. Zara's mother flew in from Accra 3 days before, along with her sister and 2 aunts who collectively interrogated Minho for 4 hours over a dinner that he handled with complete composure, and which Zara later told him had been the most impressive performance she'd ever witnessed. They asked me 17 questions about my finances, he told her afterward. 18, she corrected. You didn't hear the one my aunt whispered to my mother in Twi. He looked at her with mild alarm. What did she ask? Whether you had kind eyes, Zara smiled. She said you did. Something pleased moved through his expression. And your mother? My mother said that any man who listens when a woman talks the way you listen to me is worth the complications. She held his gaze. She's right, you know. He took her hand. I listen because everything you say is worth hearing. She looked at him in the particular way she'd learned she couldn't maintain for too long before it became overwhelming. The way that cataloged him, this man, this specific and impossible and completely hers man. Minho. Yes. 4 days. His thumb traced her knuckle. 4 days. The morning of the wedding, Zara sat in a room full of warm light, and her mother's hands braiding a gold chain through her natural hair and her sister crying already, which set the tone early. She wore ivory, not white ivory, with embroidery along the hem that her mother had brought from Accra, gold thread through dark fabric that made her skin glow in the morning light. She felt, for the first time in her life, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Minho's assistant had texted 3 times that morning, not from Minho. That would have been bad luck. They'd agreed, but relaying that he was ready and that the garden looked extraordinary, and that he had asked Ms. Yoon 4 times whether everything was in order, and Ms. Yoon wanted Zara to know this information, because she found it delightful. Zara laughed and told her mother, and her mother said, "A nervous man at his own wedding is a man who understands what he has," and pressed a kiss to her forehead. They did not account for Park Jin-soo. Park Jin-soo was the head of a rival organization, older than Minho's, less legitimate, more volatile, someone Minho had been in a long, careful, managed standoff with for 2 years. The standoff had held because both parties understood the cost of escalation. What Minho had not accounted for was that Jin-soo's son, whose various business ventures had been quietly undermined by KM Holdings, legitimate expansion, had decided that the wedding of Kang Minho was the perfect moment to make a statement. The doors of the hall opened 20 minutes into the ceremony. The ceremony was halfway through its vows when Zara heard it, the specific controlled disruption of a space's ambient sound, the way rooms changed when something wrong entered them. She was looking at Minho when his eyes moved, just slightly, to the doors at the back, a reflex, professional, trained, and then back to her, and what she saw in his expression in that half-second before he composed it told her something was wrong. She turned. Park Jin-soo's son, Yi-won, early 30s, expensive suit, the particular confidence of someone who decided the worst had already happened to him, so what was left to fear, walked down the center aisle with 2 men flanking him. 100 guests went very still. The officiant stopped speaking. Yi-won stopped 10 feet from the altar, eyes on Minho, ignoring Zara entirely. "I wanted to see it," he said conversationally. Kang Minho making himself soft, making himself reachable. His eyes moved then to Zara, and something cold moved through her that she refused to show on her face. "Congratulations on your wedding." Minho's hand around hers had not tightened. It had not moved at all. He stood completely still, which she knew by now was the most dangerous version of him. "You're at my wedding," Minho said, with a quiet so absolute that the back rows could still hear it clearly. "I am. You have 60 seconds to leave before I stop being a gracious host." Yi-won smiled. I'm not here to start a war, Minho. I'm here to deliver a message. My father says congratulations and that he hopes your marriage is long. He glanced at Zara again, a pointed look, a deliberate one, and healthy. The threat was unmistakable. It landed in the room like a dropped stone in still water, rippling out across 100 held breaths. Something changed in the air. Minho stepped forward, one step, away from Zara and toward Yiwan, which moved him between them as effectively as a wall, and he said, very quietly, with a cadence she recognized as the version of his voice that didn't leave room for misunderstanding. "Get away from her." The whole wedding room froze in shock. Not because the words were loud, because they weren't. Because Kang Minho, who was feared in this city with the specific bone-deep fear of something elemental and unavoidable, had said 4 words in a tone that suggested Yiwan had approximately 30 seconds to make a decision that would define the rest of his life. Yiwan's composure held for exactly 3 seconds. Then his eyes moved to the men positioned quietly at the perimeter of the room, Minho's security, placed with a thoroughness Zara had noticed on arrival without fully processing, and his composure slipped. Not dramatically, just enough. "We're leaving," Yiwan said to his men. "Yes," said Minho, "you are." The walk back down the aisle was not gracious. The doors closed. The silence held for another full second. Then Minho returned to the altar, took Zara's hands in his, and looked at her with an expression that was entirely composed on the surface and entirely undone underneath, visible only because she knew how to read him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, for her ears only. "Don't apologize," she said. "Finish your vows." He looked at her for a moment, and what moved across his face was something she thought she might spend the rest of her life being grateful she'd been there to see. He tightened his hands around hers, turned to the officiant, and nodded once. The ceremony resumed. Later, much later, after the guests had exhaled, and the tension had metabolized into the particular relief that made celebrations more celebratory. After the vows had been completed, and the rings exchanged, and her mother had cried in earnest and Minho's closest lieutenant had actually, quietly, wiped his eye, Zara stood with her husband at the edge of the garden watching Soul in the distance. "Husband." She tried the word internally and found it fit without friction, which surprised her and didn't. "He won't try again," Minho said. He'd been quiet for a few minutes, thinking in the way he thought, thorough and conclusive. What happened today cost them more than they gained. They miscalculated. "I know," she leaned into his side. "What happens next?" "With Jinsu," he put his arm around her. "I have a meeting scheduled with his father next week. Yiwan acted without authorization, I believe. His father is more rational." He paused. "It will be handled." "And if it is?" He looked down at her. "Then I handle it differently." His voice was even. "But you won't be in danger, Zara. I will never again stand in a room where someone can walk up to you and imply what he implied today. I made a security error. I won't make it again." "It wasn't an error, it was our wedding." She turned to face him. "Minho, today, despite everything, today was the best day of my life." He looked at her like she'd said something in a language he'd only just begun to understand and was still taking in the full meaning of. "How?" "Because I married you," she smiled. "The rest was just drama." He was quiet for a moment. Then he raised one hand to her face, same gesture, always the same gesture, the one that had begun as near accidental and was now entirely claimed, and said, "I love you." "I know," she pressed her hand over his. "I love you. I'll spend my life making sure today's interruption is the last time anyone frightens you. And I'll spend my life making sure you remember that frightened and standing at an altar finishing vows are 2 different things." She held his gaze. "I wasn't frightened. I was furious on your behalf." Something that was fully and genuinely a smile moved across his face. The real one, the one she'd spent months earning, the one that changed everything about how he looked. "I know," he said. "I saw your face." "Was I obvious?" "Terrifying," he said fondly. She laughed, and he pulled her close, and the garden held them in April light, and Soul glittered in the middle distance. And the world outside continued being complicated and political and full of men like Jin-Soo and their fragile strategies, and none of it reached them here. The months that followed were the ones she would always return to in memory when she needed to remember what ordinary happiness felt like, the version of ordinary available to them, which was unusual by anyone else's standard, but was theirs completely. Minho's restructuring continued, methodical and quiet. Her research published in full to significant academic response. She began a second project, this one on legitimate economic development in Seoul's outer districts, which required no management of dangerous sources and produced 0 threatening letters from government officials, which Minho told her was a welcome change in his life. She knew she was pregnant before she took the test because she knew her body, and because Minho noticed before she told him. Noticed the way her coffee went from necessary to intolerable, noticed that she was sleeping differently, noticed with the particular attention he gave everything that something had shifted. He didn't say anything. He waited for her to come to him. She came to him on a Sunday morning, test in hand, standing in the doorway of his office while he worked, and held it up without speaking. He stood up from his desk. He crossed the room and he took the test from her hand, and he looked at it for a long moment, and then he looked at her, and she saw his eyes go bright in a way she'd only seen twice before, when she'd said yes at the altar, and when he'd said his vows and his voice had briefly fractured on the word always. "Zara," he said. "I know," she said, already crying, which she hadn't planned. He pulled her in, one arm around her and one hand cradling the back of her head, and held her with the same controlled urgency she'd felt from him the night Sejin's people had threatened her. The same fundamental insistence of you are here. You are real. You are mine to keep safe, except layered now with something new. Something that was entirely joy and entirely terrified and entirely certain. "We're having a baby," he said against her hair. "We are." "I'm going to," he stopped, started again. "I need to," stopped again. She felt him breathe. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "I love you." He pressed his lips to her temple. "I love you completely. I love this child completely. I'm going to make sure." Another stop. "I know," she said quietly. "I know all of it. You don't have to say it." "I want to say it." "Then say it later. Right now just," she pressed closer. "Right now just this." He held her. The city was loud outside, and the Sunday light was coming through the windows of the penthouse at the angle it came when the sky was clear. And Seoul went on being Seoul, brilliant, dangerous, layered, alive. And inside their home, everything was very quiet and very certain. Their daughter was born in November, in a hospital where Minho sat beside Zara's bed for 14 hours without leaving once, holding her hand through the parts that required it, and being completely still through the parts that required that, and only leaving her side for the 30 seconds it took a nurse to transfer his daughter into his arms for the first time. He stood with her by the window. Zara watched him from the bed, exhausted, complete, watching the most controlled man she had ever known look down at 7 pounds of person and entirely come undone. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes were wet and he didn't try to conceal it. "She has your mouth," he said. "She has your nose," Zara said. He looked back at their daughter. "She's perfect." "She is." "I'm going to," his jaw worked. "Everything I've done, everything I've built and dismantled and rebuilt, none of it," he stopped. "Minho." He looked at her. "Come here," she said. He crossed to the bed, daughter still in his arms, and sat on the edge beside her, and she leaned against his shoulder and looked at the child between them. Her daughter, their daughter, this small, impossible proof of everything they'd come through, and felt the particular piece of something completed. "You saved my research," she said after a while. He glanced at her. "You saved my humanity." "We're even then." "Not even close." He pressed a kiss to the top of Zara's head, and then to their daughter's forehead, and the three of them stayed like that while the November light moved across the room. "I owe you everything." "You owe me dinner," she said. "When I'm recovered, somewhere with no corporate agenda." "Done." and you have to let me choose the restaurant." "Absolutely not." She laughed, and he smiled, and their daughter slept between them, unconcerned with any of it. And the city outside went on glittering in the way it had the night two people had stood on a balcony and decided to choose each other against every reasonable objection. Outside the window, Seoul remembered everyone born under its light. Inside the room, a family began.